Whenever you're ready.
Madam Leader is reading.
Okay, there you go.
Teasing. Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal, and as you all know, I represent 132nd District here in Springfield. So we are currently in my legislative district. So I'll give you a little bit about my background, and we'll talk a lot about what I do day to day, and I will spend some time talking about my job role as minority leader, because it is vastly different than anything else that you've heard from folks in your presentation. So a little bit about me. I grew up in Rogersville, if anyone knows where that's at. That's where I went to school. I am a first-generation high school graduate, and I went to Missouri State University, honestly, because it was the only college that I knew about. Having no one who had graduated high school before, I was like, okay, this is the closest college. I'm just going to go here. Makes sense, and I got in. My degree is in social work, and I really didn't know anything about politics at all until about my senior year of college. I grew up in a household where my parents voted, but we didn't talk about the news. We didn't get the newspaper. We weren't engaged in anything. And my parents are extremely conservative. So if you guys want to dig in a little bit about that later, I'm more than happy to talk about that difference. It really wasn't until I took a policy course as a social work student that I realized that everything social workers wanted to do in terms of like helping people and engaging with folks was dictated by public policy. Things like how much money do people get for food stamps and what does that look like? Like people who are in my position make those choices. So I decided to do my internship, which you have to do to graduate, in Jefferson City. I was the first social work student at Missouri State University to get into the legislative internship program, which was quite an ordeal because it's normally under political science. And the political science department and the social work department heads were like, this doesn't make sense, how are they the same thing? And I had to spend several months trying to convince them that like, no, it is the same thing. Fortunately, they said yes, and since then we've had probably over 40 social work students go through the legislative internship program, which is pretty cool. Every year I have several social work students who intern for me. Apologies, I walked up the stairs in this mask thing. I'm not used to this. So when I got to Jefferson City and I interned there, that is literally, honestly, when I decided that I was going to run for office one day. It was about the second week that I was there, and I realized these people don't know anything. They're not special. I'm probably smarter than them now at 19 years old, and if they can do this, I can do this. And really what it was for me so as a social work student, I wanted to get into social work to help people, right? That's why most people do that. And when I was in Jeff City, there were a lot of debates at that moment about how much money was going to be spent on XYZ. And I was like, people who are making these decisions about the budget know nothing about what it's like to grow up in poverty. And when we're talking, when we're talking about billions and billions of dollars, it's really important that you have different experiences at the table deciding what that looks like. And if you don't have people who know what it's like to grow up on food stamps, making decisions about those very people who receive that, you're not going to have a representative conversation about it. And so at that point I decided, okay, I'm going to do this someday. Don't know when, but this is my ultimate goal, is to make it to the Missouri House of Representatives. So every decision I made career-wise post that point was to get me here. I graduated on a Friday, and due to my internship, was able to start working for the United States Senate on Monday, which was very cool. And I say that to tell you all, get internships, because it opens doors like you will not believe. So I got to work for the United States Senate for 2 years. I did constituent services work for then Senator Claire McCaskill, which is essentially being a social worker for the Senate. So when people would not get Medicaid payments, or they couldn't get their passport, or the VA wouldn't help them with whatever, like they'd call me and I'd help them through that process. I did that work for 2 years, and then after that, left and worked in political organizing. I became a community organizer for the Obama team, and did that work for about a year. And that really consisted of like, how do you contact your legislator? Let's write letters to the editor, register people to vote, a lot of community organizing around public policy. I did that for a year, and we got farmed out to work on a United States Senate race. And I hated every single second of political campaigning, ironically. And so I quit, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go back to social work, and I'm gonna be a nonprofit social worker. I did that work for 6 years, and then my seat opened up. So my predecessor served his full 8 years in the House, and that seat was open because he was termed out, and I decided to run. It was a difficult decision at that time because I have 3 children. My youngest was 2, and it was very much like okay, can I do this and be a mom? Can I do this and be in Jefferson City 5 months out of the year. What does that look like for my kids? What does that look like for my career outside of politics, et cetera, et cetera. We decided to run, and I had a primary and a general election. And at that point in time, I was the only Democrat south of Columbia in the entire state of Missouri, that district. So this one was held by a Democrat, but that was the only one in the whole southern half of the state. So you can imagine that it was a very highly contested race. Both parties were like, we're going to take this seat, and it's super important. The Republican Party wanted to have the entire southern half of the state, and the Democrats had to be like, no, this is the only one, we have to save it. So it was a very expensive race. I personally raised about $125,000. The other side raised and spent about $220,000 against me, which is a lot of money for a seat this big. And just for the record, I make $36,000 a year. So that money differential is pretty astonishing and gross, to be honest with you. But the good news is that I won both my primary and my general. That experience was extremely interesting to me. I learned a whole lot about what it means to run for office as a young person, as a woman, as a mom, and was unfortunately eye-opening in all the negative ways that you can think about. We can dive into a little bit more if you have questions about that. But then, yeah, so I won my election and I went to Jefferson City. The first couple years I was in the House, I served on amazing committees. I was on the Budget Committee, which in my opinion is the most important place to be in Jefferson City. It is the only thing that we're constitutionally required to do as state reps, is to have a balanced budget in our state. Everything else we do, all the other laws we pass, are fluff per the Constitution, really. It's not a requirement of ours. And then I had a re-election, and at that point is when I decided to run for minority leader. Now, what that job entails is I'm essentially captain of the Democrats. So I get to decide what committees all of the Democrats serve on, so I get to pick and choose where folks go. I plan all of our floor strategy with our team of how we're going to debate something. So if there's a big controversial bill, we work through, you get to talk on the bill, you get to talk, you get 10 minutes, those types of things. I also handle all of the press for the caucus, so anytime there's something crazy going on, you'll see my face plastered on the newspapers, which is not always the greatest thing in the world. And then I also am the one, because of how our state is lined up, we have the Republicans hold all statewide offices except for one, and we are in the super minority in both the House and Senate. So what that really means is, like, any of the big fights that have to happen between the governor and the Democrats, it's usually me who's having to be the person who is having those fights, for lack of a better word. So my job became pretty partisan when I took over this role, which was never what I intended. As you can imagine, our district here is a pretty 50-50 district, as is Springfield as a whole. Greene County is the most 50-50 place in the entire state if you look at voter turnout. And so going from a district where my personal views, but then also the district I represent, is very divided in how we talk about things, to then taking on the role of being the person who has to talk about Democratic priorities all the time, has been an interesting balance. And then I also am, with this job role, I'm in charge of the campaign side of everything. So there are 163 seats in the House of Representatives, and my job is to recruit all candidates, to train all candidates, to hire the staffing for political campaigning, and every year I have to raise about $1.5 to $2 million. It is a lot of work, but then I also have to hold this seat, represent all of my people, work on all of the policy that's important for us at the same time as doing this role over here. When I was elected to this position, I was the second youngest in the entire country to hold minority leader, and I was the youngest in Missouri State's history to do so, which is a pretty cool thing. And then I got re-elected again, so I've had 3 elections so far, and my caucus decided to allow me to continue to serve in the role as minority leader for a second time. So that's really exciting. I have 1 more term left in the House, so next election season I could run again for the House and continue in this role if the caucus would allow me to. Or at that point I may run, don't know what I'm going to do. Our Senate seat is also up at the same time, and so while I'm being recorded, I don't know what I'm doing yet. But we have a total of 8 years in the House and 8 years in the Senate. And so it's, where I stand right now, as long as the people will allow me to continue to serve, I will do so. I love this work. It's pretty stressful, very emotionally difficult, but it is something that I truly enjoy. So That is hopefully under 10 minutes. I don't think it was.
It's actually 9 minutes and 55 seconds.
I think every time I get better and better at this.
I am going to help you violate the rule, though, and ask you a follow-up question. You clearly are a Democratic politician. Why do you identify with the Democratic Party and not some other party?
Thank you. Yeah, so I'll be honest with you guys. When I first got into this world of politics, I was one of those people that's like, burn it all down, it isn't working, I hate both parties, the two-party system's terrible, and was very much went into this world with that in mind, okay? The reality is the way our system is set up, you have to pick a team. And that doesn't mean that either team is 100% on your belief system. Maybe one day our country will be different, where we have ranked choice voting, we have multiple parties, that may happen. A lot of other countries do that. But where we are right now, it's really one or the other. And so when I started to care about what was happening in our state, in our country, as I said, I grew up in a conservative household, and I started to look at the candidates. And when I first got engaged, it was when George W. Bush was president. There was a lot going on around that time, and I knew what he was doing wasn't a lot of things I agreed with. I started to dig into more of the public policy and what was on the table. And ultimately for me, you may not hear a lot of people say this, and with this hat off, parties are a lot more similar than people think they are. In Jefferson City, 80% of what we do is together. I vote yes with the Republicans all the time. It's that 20% that is really where the differences lie. You hear the big things, abortions, guns, whatever. We're mostly the same on that stuff, even though that's not what you hear. Ultimately for me, what it boiled down to is I believe my role as an elected official is to make people's lives easier. Government's role is to be there to support its people. And when I started looking at the public policies and what the different parties presented, for me, I felt like the Democratic Party felt more in line with people. And that doesn't mean that I'm against business, doesn't mean any of that. My husband owns a small business, he employs like 50 people. I get all of that. But for me, it's about people and equity and making sure that no matter where you're born, what your family's like, the location of where you live, financial status you are, we have a level playing field so that folks in our country can be successful. And for me, the Democratic Party's policies are more in line with that. Does it mean that I think the party's perfect? Absolutely not. We have a long way to go. But part of why I shifted my mindset from burn it down, start over, is that the way to make change is from within. And whether that's political party-wise and making my party better, more in line with what I think we should be, or the way government functions, I think doing it from the inside is the way you make progress.
Great.